to you about. I want to talk to you today. Oh, there we go. Countdown on. Now we're live. Sorry for that brief glitch. These podcasts are new to me. I'm your host, Karl Krebs, for Things That Matter. I'm the founder of that group. And today we do want to talk about one of those things that matter, the high price of food at the grocery store, the scarcity of it, and I think the fragility of our food chain supply. And I have with me a veteran reporter of the ag industry. His name is Harry Siemens. He'll be joining me on stage here in just a moment. But what I feel is important here in episode 1 of Farm to Market is talk about the scarcity and the supply of food as we are seeing it. I overheard a conversation today between two friends, one of them saying, I was at a certain store, I won't mention it, and they had sugar. And I thought, you're kidding me. Sugar, one of those staple commodities like flour and milk and bread and eggs. And they said, yes, sugar. They were out. I thought, well, when does that happen? And we're seeing this. We're seeing scarcity. We're seeing high prices. And I want to go back further than just what we see at the store and talk about how is this appearing. So with the expertise of my guest, Harry Siemens, I want to welcome him to the program. Welcome, Harry. And our viewers, I think, are going to be interested to hear from 53 years of ag reporting, what is it you're seeing now and the evolution of what is happening? And so would you please indulge us and give us a brief overview of where you started and how you came? 53 years is a lot to do in a couple of minutes, but go for it.
You know, it's been a real pleasure, having been a journalist, a broadcaster, but also, secondly, as important, an advocate of the farmer. And so often I did a lot of traveling, and once social media came to be, I could take information that was happening around the world and adapt it to farmers. Well, now, of course, everybody else is on social media. I started on a farm about 5 miles northeast of Plum Coulee, Manitoba. Yes, there is a place like Plum Coulee, and proud of it. My nephew lives in the house that I was raised. My brother, at 86 years old, still farms together with his son, and it's just an interesting. But as I told you before, I think I remember I was either 8, 9, or 10 years old when my dad picked me up waiting at 5 minutes to 4 at the country school Gross Weide, which is the district that I grew up in, grades 1 to 9 or kindergarten to 9. And he would be there waiting, and I would get on the Ford tractor, and 8-section harrow. He would have planted, my brother had cultivated, my dad had planted, and I was doing the harrowing. And, and that's the way it worked. Unless I had a ball game, then he bought me a scooter. I could actually jump on that scooter and head into Plum Coulee and play ball, but at that same age. But anyway, my dad was a big farmer. He farmed 1,000 acres in 1960, which was huge. And he was
put that in the context of today. 1,000 acres then to what today?
I would say anywhere from 7 to 10,000, to especially when you take into consideration the equipment, because we had to do a lot of up and down those fields, right? And so, yeah, he was an innovative farmer, one of the first to have fertilizer and one of the first to use chemicals in the area. And so I got it, and Dad had grade 4 education. I don't say this negatively. I think he took grade 2 2 times, or whatever that saying may be, but he was really up to speed. And then when I took university, I went 1967. I had promised him that I would farm forever. We'd bought a quarter section of land together, and I would always farm. Well, and then things happened, and I was engaged to my late wife, and she said, you know what? She didn't mind marrying a dumb farmer or a farmer. She just didn't want to marry a dumb farmer. So I went back, got my grade 11 or grade 12 as a mature student right here in Winkler, and went to university. Came home in 1971, and this is the key. My father, I had no idea. I had no inkling, no thoughts. He says, Harry, there's an advertisement in the Red River Valley Echo. CFAM is looking for a farm broadcaster. What? He says, yeah, go on. So I phoned Jim McSweeney, who was the morning guy and the program director. And then within a month, I was in that studio. My father had the foresight. And the other thing I want to share, as much as I learned from him in life farming, but when I started to think I was somebody interviewing people and being on radio, my dad would come and ask me, he says, Harry, what did you mean? And after about the third time, I said, you know what, to myself, if I'm going to start communicating so that my father can always understand me. And that was probably the biggest thing that happened, because whenever I walked into a stage, did a speech or a preach or go on radio, my father needed to understand me, even though he's been gone since 1984.
You know, Harry, you and I have been friends for a few years now, and you've certainly had an impact on my life. Statements like "say it in 6," "say it in 6 minutes," or "tell them once, tell them again, and then tell them again." You know, and speaking to people at a level that they can understand, and that's kind of what we want to do here. Because we're up to 71. That's post university. You now got the job, and that starts the career that ran for many, many years full time and has now sort of become a part time. Correct?
Yeah, well, I've been a freelance and worked from home since 1985. But I was at the radio station 14 years, and then I took a bit of a leave and I started doing seminars. And then in 1991, I started hosting the Manitoba Farm Report, a half-hour weekly television show, which I did for 8 or 9 years. And that's when that came to an end, I started to become a journalist. And I started to write. And then in 2007, I had quadruple bypass surgery, and it kind of took the oomph out of me for a little bit. So I didn't go to as many meetings and I didn't do as much speaking and broadcasting, but I became a journalist. And today still, I write for 3 farm papers across Canada. One is the Ontario Farmer, which is owned by Post Media. And the other one is AgriPost, which I helped start in 2021. And the other one is Prairie Hog Country out of Leduc, Alberta. It goes to all hog producers. And I've been in every issue. And Lori Bramley, the owner, who works from home, she told me a while back, she says, Harry, we're in our 28th year and we want to for sure go till 30. I says, 30? That means I could be 80 years old. But she said, doesn't matter. Just keep going. Anyway, that's where I'm writing. And then, of course, social media. One of the areas I keep informed has to do with Twitter. I have about 8,500 followers on Twitter. And when I need to do a survey and I want to get something specific, that's where I go. And that's
you're going right to the source, right? Totally. To the source. The producers themselves, who will tell you the unglossed, ugly truth of whatever it is that they're having to deal with, and therefore you have a qualified opinion, and that's what's going to base this conversation today. That you are speaking to source level people.
Yeah, and just as I mentioned to you before, I got off the phone. I did an interview with Arlen Suderman from Kansas City, Missouri. He's one of the top commodity analysts in the United States when it comes to farm commodities. And so we had a chance to visit. And I think one thing before we get into the shortages and all that, I asked him right at the end, I says, Arlen, I says, what is the farmer? He told me earlier that we've got, you're gone.
No, go ahead, Harry. I just needed to do something off camera here. I don't like to drink in front of my audience, but my throat is parched today because of my head cold. But please continue.
I know, and all he said was, he said it to me in the first answer. He says the commodity prices and the farmers, they're going to have some real challenges because we do have enough supply in the world to feed the world. We do have enough supply in the world to feed the world. So all the bottlenecks and all the higher prices are not coming from the farmer, because the farmer is a price taker. And so he can forward sell and he can do all those things, but it's a challenge. So the farmer is a price taker and they're producing enough food to feed the world. It's distribution and it's some of the bigger companies that get their hands on it and do the manipulation.
Okay, so let's mark it in time right now. I think 2021 is a mark in time and space where no one's going to forget. It's kind of like where were you when JFK was shot? Where were you at 9/11, Hindenburg disaster, many other things that were marked in time. We saw such an egregious change of things that literally have brought us to now where we are. And in 21, I remember having a conversation with you about producers that were having their quotas cut without reason, without rhyme. Let's go back to that 21 and then maybe just pull it just a little bit gently forward as to what you have saw in 21 that kind of paints the picture now, because we can connect the dots looking back. It's very hard to connect them going forward. It's a lot more difficult.
Well, the biggest challenge that happened was probably in the livestock industry. I know a lot of processing plants, that would have to shut down because of so-called COVID and various other things. And so we didn't know what was going on. How come the processing plant shut down? And so I have a pretty close tie with people in the hog industry because I've covered it 53 years. I know more about the hog business than the guys that are involved in it today, figuratively speaking.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was a real challenge because they didn't know what exactly was going on. This plant is closed. Now that plant's closed. And we've seen a consolidation in the hog industry, of plants shutting down. And so in the US as well. So it's, we have two big processors in Manitoba, High Life, but most of their pork or all of their pork goes to Asia. And because
That's
they're
correct. I was, as a truck driver, I hauled a lot of loads out of that Neepawa plant. And that plant has grown exponentially in a market that, as you said a moment ago, there's quotas being tampered with. So I guess that explanation stands. They're overseeing, they're sending their product overseas.
Yeah, in their case, yes, they're owned. It's now totally owned by a company out of Thailand and a company out of Japan. So their product goes there. Maple Leaf, on the other hand, they export, and I just talked to somebody today, most of their product goes probably to the United States and also in Canada. So we don't have so much quota on hog production, but we did have because of plant shutdowns and so forth and changes. But at the same time, we have the dairy industry, which is across Canada. And, like in Manitoba, I think we're down to probably 260 dairy producers in Manitoba. And so the whole dairy industry is under supply management. And there, what happens sometimes, a producer may overproduce. Well, he's pouring the milk down the drain because he can't affect his quota, because then all of a sudden he's over quota and he gets
very, very, very sad as we've seen these videos play out on the internet. And back to what you said at the beginning, we have more than enough to feed the world. And here we are, the most precious of liquid form commodities, of essentials of life, milk, to newborns, to anybody, is being just needlessly dumped down the drain. And it really does, in the mind of a consumer, which I am, you are, we all are, it really breaks your heart to see that we have this deliberate attempt to dump what has tremendous value.
Yeah, and I just should also say that the dairy industry has done a good job from a standpoint of making sure that they give us the quality milk, but at the same time, yes, it's a $64 question. The grain producer doesn't get that kind of supply management where, and here's the real rub, that if the cost of production goes up to produce milk, the quota price goes up. The price to you and me goes up. And so that's why we have expensive cheese. We have fairly expensive milk. But then I don't know how often it happens, but it does happen. Then some of it has to go to the waste. But at the same time, you know what? We have supply management in eggs. We have supply management in chicken, and so it's good. We use
To put a title to that, you're really talking about the marketing boards, are you not, Harry?
totally in milk. Yeah, we have the Manitoba, the Dairy Farmers
Milk
of
boards.
Manitoba.
Yeah.
They call themselves the
Yeah.
Dairy Farmers of Manitoba, Dairy Farmers of Saskatchewan, and and then you have the Dairy Farmers of Canada. And yes, they have but they have provincial marketing boards, and
Yes.
where where the milk gets, and the biggest challenge is that they can have their marketing boards, but if any producer ever wants to sell milk to you or me, Manitoba has allowed it to happen a few times, but but you can't really do it. You cannot
No,
sell.
Harry, you know what? You've brought up something that is relevant to the last 30 days. I had someone gift me, and I can't even mention names here because it has repercussions that I couldn't believe were true until I verified it. But someone gifted me a large jar of farm fresh milk. And being a city kid, but I was my dad was a milkman, so I knew that part of the industry. And I was fascinated to see for the first time how the cream was separating from the milk. And I posted it as an example of that the cream really does rise to the top. Well, you can't believe what happened next. I was hit with a flurry of text messages telling me that I need to be careful about advertising it. I had no name on it. It was a very generic jar. It didn't identify anyone, but it ended up casting a wave of fear through these people who get their milk from these producers. Everyone has to be unnamed. It's like operating in contraband. And the ticket prices, I was told, were as high and can be as high as $10,000 to the producer if they should choose to sell and be caught selling. And then there's a ticket for even transporting them out. I was just stupefied by this situation, which, again, no intention to do anything other than to use this analogy. But there is a real ironclad grip that is on the producer to be able to do what he wants with his product.
Oh, totally. Especially under supply management. But I remember in 1994 when Manitoba Sugar closed their processing plant in Winnipeg. And, we had sugar producers and we tried to keep it going. And then the company out of British Columbia shut down the plant. And the reason I mention that, I think it was Good Friday morning. My daughter, we were having a family gathering and she needed brown sugar. So, okay, the last thing I wanted to do is go get brown sugar, but she was making dessert for us, so I better go, right? And so I went to Superstore first, and there was no sugar. I waited. He went to check the warehouse. There was no brown sugar. So then I zipped over to Walmart here in Winkler, and I looked and I looked. And I thought I was going to have to bring her those little packages, and also just in the corner, I see 2 bags. So I think I probably took the second last bag of brown sugar, and it had, for whatever reason, it must have been around because it was pretty hard. But anyway, that's really, you compare that to one side where we have supply management, but on the other hand, we have corporate bodies that do some of the same stuff. You go into Alberta right now, there's still a drought, and they were cut back where they're doing irrigation for sugar beet producers. They were cut back in half of their irrigated water for last year's crop. So, we have all these things, and then you take potatoes, like potatoes in Manitoba. If you don't have an irrigation pond and that's full of water when you start in the spring, it's tough to get that contract with McCain's or Simplot because they need to have potatoes irrigated for quality. And so It's
Is that, Harry, is that an environmental issue with the irrigation ponds as we see them up and all the land drainage that business has? How is that affected? How does the climate control people factor into all of this rising, making demands that are obviously going to be passed on?
Well, not so much, like I just happened to drive by at the just east of Winkler, very close to Plum Coulee. There's a 40-acre above ground water storage. And I've had the privilege of flying every summer, and I see these irrigation ponds from the top. But, it's the irrigation. I don't know if it has so much to do with the climate change, but what they do is the water that comes down the creek comes down the river. That's where they need the runoff in spring so that they can pump from those creeks into those storages. And I mean, the whole, we have more irrigated land, or tiled land, I should say, which is another aspect of improving soil by using tile. That's another whole story when it comes to conservation department with Manitoba government and so forth. It'll be interesting what this new government will do with those tiling applications and irrigation and so forth.
In terms of how far they're going to enforce it.
How far, you bet, how far they enforce it and how many permits they'll actually give when, because I've watched farmers tile their land since 1997. And I've done stories with that and have seen how it's improved the land. But, you always have somewhere where you've got to get the water from somewhere, right? and so this next person may not, whatever, but it has to do with provincial permits in order to get that done properly.
Okay. So let's go and utilize your longevity in the market and peel back the curtain a little bit and talk about what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, everybody's well aware that Bill Gates is the largest landowner in the United States. And it's astounding if you investigate how many acres he has purchased. And nobody seems to be concerned about that. Well, we know where Bill Gates is in the WEF and the globalists and those people that want to rule the world. How far does this, in your mind, connect itself to that we have overseeing all-powerful people determining what's going to actually be done in terms of quota, who gets to have a chicken, who has 3 chickens and has to give 1 chicken away so that you both have 2, all that kind of stuff that we used to say was conspiracy, but we are seeing it in the land of plenty. As we have said earlier, we're experiencing scarcity and an ever increasing price to what we're paying. How do you see it unfold as a guy that can stand back and look that far back?
The biggest challenge that we're seeing right now is the influence that the World Economic Forum and the European Environmental Group, what they have. And I go back to quoting Ted Menzies. Ted Menzies is a member of parliament from Alberta. I know Ted personally, and he also was, way back when, he was the president of the Western Canadian Wheat Growers, and that's how I got to know him. And Ted was part of a forum about a year ago, and he says, he says agriculture in Ottawa, the Department of Agriculture, they just do what Environment Canada says. Everything comes down from Environment Canada. So now, of course, we saw the carbon tax. Well, that increase, I have seen bills from farmers, where they
even now in the last few days or prior to April 1st?
Prior to April 1st. I haven't seen it since, but bills where they would get delivery for propane for the season to dry their grain. Well, that price all gets taken right back. I mean, it gets charged one on top of the other. So my biggest concern is that once Trudeau started speaking of cutting back on fertilizer, we're going to do it. We haven't heard as much of it lately, but I talked to Gilbert Savarin. I did an interview with him at St. Jean, a smaller farmer. I says, what if you have to cut back on fertilizer use by 30%. He says it would mean that he said people have no idea how much profit is driven by the extra production. That's the difference between making a profit and losing money. And so he said, the farmers like us, 3,000 acres or whatever it was he farms, he says, we would simply not be able to make it go. And so, we have, those are the things that concern me far more. What's coming down the pike, and when I see on the political side, the leader of the opposition, Pierre, and so whenever I see him on Twitter and he says, "Well, we're against the carbon tax," you know what? The carbon tax is just the symptom. It's the climate change that is driving that carbon tax. And so that's where I listen very carefully. And so what will happen? Like right now, to put in an acre of corn in Manitoba, $850 an acre. $850 an acre.
Put that in perspective, because comparisons are needed for those who don't know what $850 an acre is. If you're buying land and you can buy it for that, that's a good deal. But if you have to pay that to put the seed in the ground, how does that compare?
That's just the cost of production. It includes everything. But the actual cost of production every year is 650. The other 200 has to do with existing costs, right? Land costs, labor, and those kinds of things. So what does it compare? Well, in 1967, if we put in $25 to $50 an acre cost of production, land cost us $300 an acre in 1967. And so now land costs can be anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 an acre. I just did an interview yesterday or 2 days ago with a senior economist with the Federal Credit Corporation, and that's the big lender, kind of a government arm, but has done great work for farmers. We used it way back when, and right now the land costs are going up more so. And there's a little concern, especially in Ontario and some other places, that the rate of the land price increase is making it more difficult to keep it sustainable for the farmer.
But at the same time, Harry, you're going to see producers look at that land cost, the rise, and be tempted to shut it down.
Well, and that's the other thing. Right now, land, we don't make any more land.
Never have been. It's only what you got is what you got.
But I asked, his name was Justin Shepard with the FCC. I says, how much of the land farmed today is owned by absentee landowners?
Yes.
He said
conglomerates, billionaire investors.
About 10% at this point. In Canada, about 10%. Okay. See, we had some strict laws where you couldn't be in some province. Each province was different, where you couldn't be an absentee landowner. You had to come here to farm it. Like a third of the dairies that I talked about are probably outside of Canada, mostly from Europeans. And they came in here because they could sell over there and buy something here.
Yeah, it was like the housing market. When I had a place in Arizona, people were selling out of California and paying overpriced because they could afford it. And the European farmers, which I had a chance to meet too when I was hauling commodities years ago, most of them were European. They were glad to be here because of a number of factors. But when we look at it now, it has changed significantly in the last 3 years. And when you talk about these increases and these real costs of operations, are you in some ways surprised that we're not seeing even higher prices than we're seeing?
Like higher land prices or higher
prices to the consumer, because ultimately all of this has to be passed forward.
Yeah, but as I talked to you just before we came on the air, I have a very good friend, Dr. Sylvain Charlevoix. He's called the Food Professor, and he's on Twitter. He does weekly shows and is on media all the time. and he's been really following it. And right now, the grocery stores across Canada would like to set up a an ethics, their own ethics group, like a grocery ethic, so that they would do things right. But the two bigger ones don't want any part of it. And so,
well, yeah, there are two companies that control. I know Loblaws is 60% of the groceries consumed in the country,
and Walmart is the other one.
Yeah, and you take those together, and you have a controlling interest in that market. You have a domination in that market.
And the thing that he talks about is shrinkflation. Where we're seeing smaller packages, same price, smaller packages.
Some people posted that recently. I saw one lady said, "Here's the jar of," I don't think it was salad dressing, and the new package, and you could see the drop in the mLs, and the price was the same.
And then there's the other one. I think it's called dynamic pricing. I forget the term, but anyway, where they sell, where they charge more, and Wendy's is doing this in the U.S., and they're also doing it some other places, but where they charge a higher price when the market is bigger, like at supper time, they charge more, and then if halfway, at coffee time, they drop the price. And
I've seen it play out. I was recently traveling through Ontario, and a long route all the way from Quebec into Elvinston, Ontario. And most of you will have to look it up, because I sure had to look it up. Where is Elvinston, Ontario? And I noticed, like, in these en route locations, every one of them had between a $3 and $4 premium for the same meal package that I could buy at a fast food that was not as conveniently located. So I think that's the right term, dynamic pricing, where they can change those reader boards. In fact, I was in one, and they had the wrong price up. I said, well, that's the wrong price, because they hadn't changed it yet. Now I was on the new price.
Oh boy. So all of the shrink, there's another term. Shrinkflation is one that has really become evident, and quality, like in that, where the quality isn't what it used to be in some of those packages, but the price is the same. So they drop the size of the package, keep the price, and maybe quality wise not quite so good either. So that, but the area that bothers me the most is when that people are having difficult time paying rent, and right now the grocery bill for an average Canadian has dropped significantly over the last 3 years, I believe, 3-4 years, and where they just aren't buying don't have as much money to spend for groceries. So the groceries have increased in price, and the take-home pay has dropped for a lot of them. So you know what? Those are the areas that I believe we really need.
And we all identify those three essentials: food, shelter, clothing.
Yeah.
Now we know where shelter prices are extremely high. We're not going to get into housing now.
Exactly.
But we know the cost of living. That is the actual groceries that you need and want, and you're finding a hard time to pay that with a an income, a disposable income that's not keeping track with the price of food. Do you remember, and I'm going to ask this out of ignorance, I don't know the last time I heard COLA being talked about, cost of living allowance, or the relevancy of what is the cost of living gone up for. There used to be these presentations made annually about the same basket of groceries and what it cost then and what it costs now. I think it's so high that nobody actually wants to publish it. What do you think?
The food professor has been doing that.
Okay.
He's been doing that, and he's not always been the most popular, but at the same time, it's really interesting how he follows that, and maybe someday I could even arrange to have him on here.
I'd love to have him on as an interview. That's someone who obviously can shed a lot of light, because he is well experienced in that. So we have a few minutes left here, and I want to bring it back to point about our producers. And I want to ask you a pointed question, not to put you on the spot, but I think you're going to give us all an honest answer. Have the marketing boards outlived their original purpose and value?
They have to some extent, and it's interesting when dairy farmers and I would go onto their farm. When dairy farmers came from other countries, they would build big enough so that if the supply management or the marketing board was gone, they would be able to expand their cow herd by enough to continue to make a good living. So I was there when they took the marketing board away from hog producers. That was in 1995, and after that, we saw the hog industry expand, right? And so, the dairy people are the biggest challenge that anybody who wants to take away the supply management from dairy and poultry, and that's Quebec. That's really where the biggest dairy farmers are. And if you take away supply management, Quebec would be, their farmers would be dumping manure on Ottawa streets.
Okay, because they rely on that controlling interest to keep their prices where they need them to be. So some are benefiting and some are losing. But I marvel at these producers that take these huge risks, as I said earlier about the farm fresh milk. And I thought, wow, this guy takes a big chance selling his stuff directly to consumers as they're now part of this secret society. It's the only way I can describe it is these people, some of them, it was interesting because they had children that were quite allergic to the processed pasteurized form of milk, but their kids were able to drink milk without any side effects and enjoy it farm fresh. So again, it doesn't serve the consumer to the full extent that it can. In some ways, it protects the producer, as you talk about Quebec, but in other areas, it's a very iron grip on it that they can't do what they would like to do.
Oh, totally. They have to stick to and that's, when I've gone to dairy meetings here in Manitoba, the whole aspect of sustainable environment is really key. That they work very hard.
Okay, let's end up on that note because you alluded to it earlier as you referred to the guy that wants to be our prime minister, and he's talking about the carbon tax. And I think you've got a very astute observation there is that he's not going far enough to pin it, to put the blame where it needs to be put. That's in the environmental interest of globalists and the elitists and the utopians that want to support, all this environmental stuff that is wreaking havoc on the things that we have to deal with. So if you were to give Mr. Pierre Poilievre some advice from a 53-year career, what would you say to him about that when he says axe the tax and all that stuff? What would you say to him?
I've said it to him on Twitter a few times. And number one, and I posted something on LinkedIn today, and I said it was two scams. It was the climate scam and the tax scam, and basically, and then he says, "Well, what do you mean? You sure haven't done any research if you believe there's no climate?"
He actually responded to your tweet.
This was the guy on LinkedIn.
Okay, sorry.
Anyway, so I said, you know what? When I see the people that gather at Dubai for their climate conferences, when they start doing it like you and I are doing it via Zoom camera, I will believe them, because here they say, do as we say, but don't do as we do. And that,
in other words, you fly commercial, we'll fly private jet.
Yeah, Mr. Pierre, Pierre, that's the thing I like to tell him. You make sure that it isn't just about tax. It's about climate and what you think is happening. And a book is coming out by Dr. Tim Ball, who I interviewed and met many times. And he had all the records. And when anybody tried to tell him about climate change, he went all the way back as far as you could go. And so this particular point, yes, but when you go far back, forget it. So anyway, we need to be careful that we don't legislate our farmers out of business, because then we're going to be in real trouble. Just look at the gas price. $2, what was it, $1.10 when the provincial government came in and took off their tax?
Yeah.
It's at
$1.60 now or more. I haven't seen it lately.
But in Winkler, $1.43 after the price of. So you know what? We'll have to wait and see. But it's been a pleasure, and I love talking about farming and agriculture. I will always have farmers, be at their back. Even there's dairy farmers that work hard at making sure they get our the healthy milk. But at the same time, we have hog producers, grain producers, soybean producers. You know what? One positive note, Arborg, Manitoba, north of Winnipeg, a couple of hours, they grew 175 bushels an acre corn in 2023. You know what? 10, 15 years ago, we couldn't do that. Why? Because we have genetics that are geared to that area. And so that's a real plus.
Yeah. Very good. Harry, thank you so much. Please come back again and we'll revisit another conversation of how, we're talking about farm to market and what's relevant. And I thank you so much for sharing your insights with us here today.
Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure.
Well, folks, I want to just say that was episode 1, and I did not disappoint, as I've known Harry for quite a while. And we had a lot of off camera that we were doing. And I knew he'd come on and bring his A game. And he's got a lot more to say about this industry and the challenges that we eventually end up facing. So please like and share what we're doing. Things That Matter is taking a new slant on stuff. We want to talk about the real things that matter. And certainly food pricing and the ever increasing costs really do matter to all of us. So I thank you for watching. Please share this out to your friends, and we'll see you on another broadcast of Things That Matter at another time. God bless you all wherever you are.